as if it had paused to rest in its ever-circling observation of the world below. For anyone but Amari Del Rey, the situation would surely be dire. However, you already know that if that were the case, this tale would end here. But look, in this instance, you are more informed than the young woman who is about to tumble down the ravine. In this very moment, which of you is more powerful? The phone flew from her hand as if in slow motion, and it was quickly forgotten as panic fully set in. The girl threw her hands up to ward off the impact of the ground she rapidly approached. No! Her voice echoed around the canyon as fear of death kicked in. But something strange happened. The impact did not snap her neck or wrists. It didn't bounce her down the cliff like a limp rag doll. When she hit the side of the cliff, it was as if all forward momentum simply died. She collapsed to the rocks painlessly and began to slide. Then, before she could get purchase with her scrabbling hands, she slid over another ledge. That time, she didn't land. With eyes screwed shut tight, she stopped. The wind whistled through the trees, but the sound was overshadowed by the pounding of her heart. Seconds ticked by, and Amari didn't sense any more movement, so she slowly opened her eyes. The world held a strange glow. She wasn't safe on the ground, with only a few scratches to show for her mishap. She wasn't stranded on a ledge, waiting for the slightest movement to send her to her death. Amari floated in midair, hunched over as if she were predicting another strange, non-impact fall. And soon as she realized she was floating away from the cliff face, she dropped again, and the entire cycle repeated itself. When the dark-haired girl finally came to a full stop with all body parts on the ground, she was sitting in a foot of icy snow. The lake was still below her, and the sun continued to shine down from high above. The eagle even called again to let Amari know that the world was just as it had been before she did the impossible. Well, shit. Unable to process what had just happened, Amari searched around for her phone until she remembered it was the first casualty of her strange tumble down the mountain. Before panic could reassert itself in the forefront of her mind, she let curiosity get the better of her. She stood up, with the back of her jeans slightly damp, and tried to remember the feeling from when she was suspended in the air. A tightness washed through her entire body, much like one of her anxiety attacks, and she began to rise. If anyone had been watching the trail in midday, or if anyone had seen the lone hiker who tumbled down the mountain and lived, their surprise would have been eclipsed by the new sight above Lake 22. Floating in the air over a strip of leftover spring snow was a young woman. Her once dark hair and eyes both glowed a flaming white color. It was as if an iridescent white fog slowly escaped from those two places, like heat from a body in winter. And the person that was Amari Del Rey was forever changed.
Very nice. One of my favorite scenes.
It's the
Okay.
it's the hero. Like I just learned that I'm a hero scene or whatever.
I know. Always one of my favorites, and such a powerful, awesome one, straight out of Punch. Um, I was curious, what drew you to this format where you have a lot of different points of view in the novel, not a lot, a few, and but one of them is this third wall or fourth wall breaking narrator, and I wondered how you decided, or rather, why you decided to write it that way.
Um, it was definitely a gamble, but I don't really consciously set out to, I guess, push the envelope when it comes to writing. I do a lot. I tend to do things. I like to try new things. I like to do things differently. And when I wrote this book, I very much had the that comic book uh, image in my mind, right? And as you know, if you've ever read a comic book, they frequently break the fourth wall because a lot of comics will have this narrator voice. And I'll admit that while this particular tale was being written, the family just happened to be watching the Lemony Snicket series on Netflix, which Patrick Warburton, he has that narrator voice. And also whenever I read this and I read the narrator voice of Children of the Stars, I am hearing the black and white Twilight Zone guy like in my
Oh,
head.
yeah.
So
Uh,
imagine if you will, you know.
yeah. Yes.
And so that's it kind of, to me, that lent itself to the comic book nature of the story. It came off more like this action epic, where you follow different characters are doing different things. You know, it's not just about these two heroes, it's about all the other heroes that are around them. So you have this like third person um, plus you have that narrator voice. And I didn't know how to write the narrator voice as far as like the technical parts. It was my publisher that decided to do the different font to really offset it, and that was based on my editor's recommendations. So that was interesting. I was like, oh, this is kind of cool, different, I guess, you know.
Yeah.
So, but yeah.
Awesome. Well, if anybody has any questions, just feel free to either write them out or raise your little hand in the thingy. But until you do, I'm going to keep firing off, and they're just going to get harder and harder.
Oh
So if
no,
you feel bad for Kelly, that's just kidding. They're not. Now people be like, I want to know what they are.
they don't feel bad for me. It's okay.
So I read quite a few comics too. Also love the X-Men, love, love, love. And I realized that comics have this long history of involving alien life forms and extraterrestrial thingbobs.
Supergirl. So,
Yes.
sorry.
Well, but for yeah, but I mean for having like aliens from outside like coming in and not just like poof, they're
Little
here.
gray aliens.
Well, I was wondering why. So, when you do superheroes, why you also chose to bring in that alien factor so soon, I guess, as it were, into the superhero book and like combine the superheroes with the sci-fi. I mean, was it mainly just to introduce powers, or were you like, no, I must have spaceships?
Um, I mean, that's a legit reason. And let's have spaceships because I'm not saying it's aliens, but
Yeah.
so I can mess up my hair and do some sucralose for anybody that follows that show. I do not. However, my wife and stepson love that show, Ancient Aliens. So it's kind of always in the back of my head anyway. But um, it's hard to answer this question without spoiling some other novels that I've written. So as some people who people that are familiar with my work sometimes pinpoint parts where my books will intersect. And the way I explain it is it's not always intersecting like this book. They don't always take place on the same place or in the same world. But there are moments where they intersect, almost like they could be alternate versions of the same world. However, I will give you this tidbit. This book, Children of the Stars, takes place in the exact same world, or I guess universe, as the Sovereign of Sayer.
Okay.
So the Tau, you have like the Tau Ceti from Children of the Stars, or this like ancient alien race that is not, you know, the little gray alien in the desert from like X-Files and Men in Black. That is not actually the alien they found in the desert in Children of the Stars. And I
Right.
think the reason why I started the book the way I did is because throughout Children of the Stars, you have these two very divergent worlds. You have the world of Amari and Zen, these two alien princesses. And then you have the Chromadex, and they're in this world, and they eventually their paths come together, and then they kind of stay together. And so I think in order to set the history for those two very different people, I had to start toward the beginning. So for instance, the alien in the 1952, I like a good origin story, and I thought, you know what, this one's pretty well established. Why not take that crash landing in Area 51 in the desert and just, you know what, steal it. It's mine
Yeah.
now.
Classic.
And then, you know, of course, with the mothers, that was kind of like a sad scene, and sorry for that, but the
Eh,
mothers of, because you can't have a hero without some sort of family tragedy, I
well,
think.
yeah. I mean, neither comic book nor Disney. No parents.
No,
Nobody gets out
they don't
alive
get
with
out
all their
alive.
parents. No,
Right. I don't even
no.
make that choice conscientiously. It's just what I write. And after, like, this is my 10th novel, and my mom reads all of my books, which is really funny. And I stopped to think, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like almost all the parents are dead or horrible in my books. And I'm like, I still love you, mom. That has
Mhm.
nothing to do with that.
No,
But
she's
yeah,
gonna be on the lookout now.
yeah,
Yeah. No, you're never getting power of attorney.
I have power of attorney.
Oh
So
well, she really should have read your books before she did that.
I've only been
Um,
writing a couple years, so you know.
so does this mean that we are going to get more crossovers in the future in your books, a la the comic books multi-Earth platform that we're seeing a lot nowadays?
No.
Ah.
I know this is a
Wow,
one and done.
no.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. This is a one and done. Um,
You say that, and they're going to crop up 3 books from now and something
I
in the
don't. Okay.
background. There they
Here's the
go.
secret. Here's the secret. I have a trilogy. I have another series that's going to be a trilogy. The second book comes out this year. And then I have another series that's 2 books, never going to write a third. Sorry if you liked them. Um, and I hate series books. They're so hard. They're so hard. Um, so I'm not, I have no plans of writing any more stories about Amari and Zen. I don't even have plans of writing necessarily another book in this world, but again, never say never, because I don't know about you, but my brain does whatever the heck it wants. It's like, oh, I'm going to write one of these 3 stories at the beginning of the year. And I did not write any of those stories at the beginning of the year. I'm working on something completely different that was just a wild hair. So
Mm.
never say never, but no more stories about Amari and Zen. Their stories told. It's done.
Yeah, well, you said never say never right before you said that. So, I mean,
Their stories told, but never say never about another book, maybe like in this particular world. But it might not even
ah,
have the narrator voice. Like that was just a,
no, but it's always a nice little Easter egg to put them like in the background, and you're like, did anybody spot them there? Because there they went.
okay, so I have a lot of so for people that have read my work, I like authors that put their works in the same world or will intersect their works
Mm-hmm.
in some way. And when I started writing accidentally, I was like, oh, I like this, so I'm going to do that. I do the cafeteria plan of writing. And it's if I find something, I decided, you know what, I'm never going to like just write one genre. So I'm going to write a lot of genres. There are other authors that do it. I'm going to do it. This is what I want. And same thing with putting little points where my different books and worlds merge. And sometimes it's really hard. It's pretty much impossible. It's hard to merge, say, my Arrow of Artemis series in ancient Greece, like with any of my other books. I have done it. I
Mm.
did it. The next book I have coming out, you might see a reference to that. But I try to merge sometimes places and even names and even characters, again, like an alternate universe type way. So if
Mhm.
you read this book, oh, that was a weird sound. Did you hear that?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So if you read this book, you may or may not remember where Amari or when Zendara and her best friend Sin go to a little bar called Gears.
Hmm.
Um, now Gears is a bar in Royal Oak that's also featured in my cry book, my drama, my romantic drama, Burn It Down. The 2 main characters go to this little bar called Gears in Royal Oak. And one of those, uh, the characters, the main cast from my rom-com make an appearance in Burn It Down, like because one is a cousin of one of the main characters. So I try to like put these worlds, like they're intersected in little ways. And there are other ways that Children of the Stars intersects with say the Sovereign of Sayer. The Sovereign of Sayer, here's your Easter egg, takes place roughly 1 to 200 years in the past of Children of the Stars.
Nice.
So for anyone that's read The Sovereign of Sayer, the main continent, the one continent is called Endara, and the ship in the Children of the Stars that the bounty hunters report back to is the Endara,
Mm.
the spaceship.
Yeah.
So there are other points that I can't tell you. So
Um, so you mentioned that you hear the Rod Serling Twilight Zone voice when your narrator's talking. Do
yes,
you ever consciously include nods to other shows or sci-fi or genres that you just love that
I
people could spot if they looked really, really hard?
um I do sometimes um like the ancient aliens, talking about crazy conspiracy theorists. It does reference something similar in Children of the Stars. I can't remember the exact point or passage, but it references, mention of, crazy alien conspiracists, it gets them talking, but nobody believes them anyways, people with crazy stories and crazier hair, right? For anybody that, follows that kind of thing. Um, so, I do keep kind of that stuff in the back of my head, and and people read what they want into it. So if people read like a very Superman, alien falls to Earth and has these grows up here, people read that into it. They read the Red String of Fate with the soulmates into it. But I do consciously include kind of like almost like tongue-in-cheek nods or phrases. Um, the next book I have coming out. Uh, so the coffee shop that they talk about in Children of the Stars, like, hey, do you want to go to the beanbag? And they're like, sure. Meanwhile, they're trying to get back into hiding. The beanbag is actually featured pretty prominently in my next book that comes out in a few months. It's because it's also set in Chicago, and so this coffee shop is actually featured in that book. It's like their favorite place to go. So I try, and then that book is loaded with references to even other authors' books. That's just
Mm-hmm.
interesting, part of the character's journey. There also are bastardized lines from famous sci-fi movies in that book. If you read it, anybody that's seen some of these movies are like, yep, that's the line, like that's the famous line I know, but it's just a little bit different. So, um, so yes, I do reference, because everything we do as authors, as creators of anything, it's taking in all of this input, whether it's reading, whether it's watching movies or watching TV or listening to music, and then it all jumbles together, and we knit this story and send it out into the world. So how can
Yeah.
you not include references?
Well, yeah. I was just wondering if there was anything where you were like, but deliberately like, this is my nod to blah. But yes, I see that you are. Um, so when you're describing your own work, and you were telling me earlier it's 70-30 or whatever this, do you ever lead with one genre over another when you're talking to different people? I mean, because this book is, it's romance, it's superheroes, it's sci-fi, it's star-crossed lovers, it's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So do you just always lead with superheroes for this one, or do you sort of change that up based on who you're talking to?
Um, I think I always lead with the words mostly speculative fiction, because I don't just write like, one or two genres. I write a lot of genres, and I write a lot of genres all into one book, like a lot of themes, a lot of tropes. Um, that was how my the Sovereign of Sire was conceived, because unfortunately at the time, I was doing a lot of reading, and that's, by a lot I mean it's like a book a day. And at the time I was doing a lot of reading, and I read a steampunk book, and I was like, we need more steampunk books out into the world, right? And I was like, I love steampunk, we need more of those written. And then I read a royal romance, and I'm like, I love royal romance. I don't know why, I just love certain tropes. And then like mental powers have always just been cool to me. I don't know if it started maybe with comic books or even earlier. Anne McCaffrey, uh,
Mm-hmm.
she has her, it was Acorna
Yeah.
series where they had the primes, where they had this like super telekinetic powers, and so they've always just really fascinated me. And if you read Waking the Dreamer at all, um, the powers work very similar with the chromatics that they do in Waking the Dreamer.
Mm-hmm.
You have to, it's a mammal's, any mammal with a pineal gland, which is supposed to be your third eye, by the way. I did a lot of research for that one. Any mammal with a pineal gland, that you have to have that to have these mental powers. And so that was also included in Children of the Stars and in the Sovereign of Sire. So in Mythical Beasts, the Sovereign of Sire was, I want to do all these things and I don't know which one to pick, and I did them all in one book. So I
When
do
in
like,
doubt.
I think they were in backwards. They kept falling out. I don't know. I have weird ears. So when you say, do you lead with a particular genre? I can't even, I don't tailor it to who I'm talking to because you never know what somebody's is unless they just walk up to you and they don't introduce themselves. They just say, I like romance, and you're like, oh, well, good. I have some romance,
It does
That's
happen.
what I just lead with speculative fiction because it really kind of encompasses everything. Oh man,
Yeah. Well, we
Cheryl's
have
asking hard questions.
yes, we have the question from Cheryl. What is your research process like for writing speculative fiction? You're not going to get out of it that easily just by taking your headphones out.
Honestly, I think they were right the first time. I just have weird ears. Okay. Oh man, that really, really depends um, on whatever I'm writing about in that moment. So I do a lot of pantsing. When I have an idea, I'm just flowing, pantsing, pantsing, pantsing. And then I'm like, wall, okay, now I'm writing about something I don't know about. So then I do a bunch of reading and a bunch of research. So for instance, in this novel, the two main characters have, I had to do a lot of research to come up with how do their powers work. And their powers work based on matching resonance frequency and absorbing energy. So I had to do a lot of reading about resonance frequency, mechanical resonance frequency. I watched a lot of videos about bridges that go crazy and collapse. Like I did a lot of research because I don't know about any of this stuff. So I had to do a lot of research. I'll sometimes I spent 2 days reading about ciphers when I wrote The Sovereign of Sire, just so I could, because I have to understand something in order to write it, to paint the picture for you as a reader. And if I don't understand it, I can't paint the picture and I fail. So I have to essentially learn all these things that I write about as I write them. So the research process can sometimes be really intense. I keep a lot of notes. I have while I write in Microsoft Word, my notes are all in Google Sheets. So I have tabs for all different things. When I use sites for reference, I save all the links so that I can come with a description so I can come back to it later. I have, if I do research on, for let's say Children of the Stars, I do research on all these different mental abilities. I make notes. For instance, when I did research on the mental abilities for the Sovereign of Sire, I actually plotted out fight scenes in Excel. I figured out how fast the power regenerates, how much of their essentially energy they could use before they're actually out. And I had it all plotted out in with formulas.
Nice.
So my research can be pretty intense, and I research everything from land to electrical engineering. The book I just wrote is about a roboticist who loses her memory, right? And she works at a company called Organic Advancement Solutions, which has 4 divisions: robotics and artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, biomedical, and artificial prosthetics. I had to learn about all of those things to write this book. Like it was really hard. So on one hand, like I really like this part of it. I really, really like the research process because I like learning new things, but I don't like it in regards to slowing my flow, if that makes sense.
It does. Do you ever get lost down a research rabbit hole, like you just meant to research one thing and suddenly you're writing about, or you're reading about like Arctic foxes and you're like, that crap.
Every single time. Every single time. Like it was I don't know if anybody was in one of the panels last year at GCLS and somebody was talking about like the mating habits of whales or dolphins or something. So then all of a sudden, like looking up like all this information about it, and I'm like, how did I just go down this rabbit hole? And all it took is one question from the crowd or like some random comment.
Yep.
And yeah, every single time I will be researching one thing and then that leads to another and another and another. And pretty soon I'm well educated on things that really didn't matter. And now, you know, 2 hours are gone.
Right.
So rabbit holes, they're a problem.
Exactly. So is there any genre or trope out there that you would really, really love to take and maybe turn it on its head? or look at it in a different way that you don't think it's been looked at before?
So I mentioned that I'm writing fantasy right now, which I've never done before.
Mm-hmm.
And this, over the 4 books that were in queue ahead of it, yes, 4 books. One was like a ghost book. One was a story about the Queen Oriana of my Amazon tribe. One is like a young adult kind of twisted story, and the other one is something. The other one was my Little Mermaid retelling. Only it's also instead it's a werewolf origin story.
Well, that's a pretty good turning on the head of something right there.
And that one I wrote out a synopsis because I had this entire story plotted out. The synopsis is about 5 pages long.
Mm.
I haven't written the story yet, but it's right there.
Yeah.
So that's I guess one example. Another example is the story that I just started here at the beginning of the year. I've never written fantasy. My beta reader keeps trying to get me to write fantasy. You know, ladies with swords, yay! And
Yay.
I love ladies with swords, but I just haven't got around to it. And I remember somebody was posting about the romance writers. They're like, oh, but you're an award-winning author, and I'm like, I write speculative fiction. That's not going to pay the car payment. Like, it doesn't matter how many awards you win, it's still speculative fiction. I'm like, no, romance writers, man, I got to get into that contemporary romance gig. And
Mm.
then that spun me down a rabbit hole of like, I don't really read a lot of contemporary romance unless they have those couple tropes that I like, which is royal romance, um, celebrity romance, and a fake romance. I love fomance. I don't know why. So then I thought, well, what if I took these contemporary tropes and set them in a made up fantasy world? So
Mm-hmm.
now I'm writing a fomance between a half elf swordswoman and a dragon shapeshifter.
Nice.
And I created an entire world to do this. And then I thought, well, I don't want to waste this world. So after I finish building this entire world, perhaps later I'll do another standalone novel in it, tackling a different contemporary, like a Second Chances, you know.
Surprise
So
dragon baby.
no dragon babies, no
Yeah.
babies.
Yeah, dragon.
Um, I can see how you'd root for that, but yeah, I like to twist things. I don't like to just write what's expected, or because I get bored. I don't want to read the same thing over and over again. So, and because I am my number one like reader, like I read it first, and if I'm not entertained, then bye. So,
Well, sorry to hear. The audience is very heavily in favor of surprise dragon baby. So you should put that next on your list. But
surprise dragon baby,
surprise
maybe
dragon
an
baby.
epilogue.
Rebecca says, you've mentioned you are writing fantasy and the research in so much of your fiction to date. Does this mean you are a plotter or writing more as a pantser?
You
And
mean
you've
in
already
regards
talked
to the
about the
in
fantasy, I
regards to
think she's
fantasy?
talking about, yeah,
Um,
since it's new to you.
it's still required because I'm building a whole new world, and anytime you're building a world, you I don't know. I'm a let me think. So there are 2 kinds of books that I like to read that are speculative fiction, whether it's fantasy or sci-fi. One is what I consider sci-fi light, where the world that you build is very immediate. It's very around the characters. There's not a lot of explanation for what or how or the whole picture. And then there's like in-depth world building, where you literally build the world from the ground up. You think about everything, including the size of the world, what the creatures on it are like. And so when I built this world, I have a map. I like maps. Maps give me visual points of reference.
Mm,
Maps let me set what distances are. So if I say it's going to take, a month to travel from point A to point B, I have to make sure that every other bit of traveling in this world follows that same parameter. So even though it's fantasy, I still have to build this entire world, and I a lot of fantasy authors, and I actually read all about this because I fell down a different rabbit hole not long ago. A lot of fantasy worlds and fantasy authors directly built their world off Tolkien's
Middle
creatures
Earth. Yeah.
and rules, right?
Yep.
Um, and I don't necessarily want to follow those rules. So if I say that a half elf can live for 1,000 years, then so be it. If I say that half the elves are bonded in a lineal bond to an elven mount that passes from like parent to child, that's what I'm going to do, and that's a new rule. And if I
Yep.
say that there's a binary god that is genderless, then and all the monks take a vow of gender balance, that's what I'm going to do because it's my world and my rules. So I still have to do a lot of research, but it's like it's not just research, it's I'm scribing it all down at the same time for posterity. you
Mm.
know
Mm-hmm.
I have to create it and then write it.
Right.
I took 2 weeks off of writing because I got it because I wrote a dice game in this book.
Mm.
2 weeks from writing to make this dice game, to create the rules, to force my wife to play over and over again until she just was both frustrated and humored by me. That's 2 weeks I wasn't writing because I needed to create this dice game, and I did.
Yeah.
It's charming.
Yeah.
She called me charming and endearing, but she says it sarcastically every time.
Mm. Mm.
So sometimes I fall in this, I have to go with what my brain wants to do. And if it says you need to do this dice game, and now I have to go back and actually rewrite one of the scenes where they're playing this game because the rules are a little different than what I originally wrote.
Yeah. Yeah. And I hope that you don't end up cutting most of it because you're like, well, crap. This dice game's awesome, but
Oh, I'm
anyway.
not cutting that scene. No way. It's important. It's an important scene for character progression. So
Sure. Yeah. Oh, okay. So tell us a couple things here. One, what is your very next thing that's coming out? And two, what other spec fic books, movies, TV shows, games are you just crazy about right now?
Ah, okay. So very
Take those
next
in
book.
whatever you want to do, what order.
Yeah. All right. All right. I'll tell you about the stuff that I follow. I haven't. Um, I'm going to admit this, and it's going to be bad, but I've read one book since July.
Mm,
This is it's a problem for me. I'm normally like a really um, avid fanfic reader too. I also have hardly read any fan fiction. I really haven't been doing any writing, and this is like I don't know. I think other authors fall into it too, where you put so much pressure on yourself to write, and and it makes it. I haven't been reading, but I do love speculative fiction. So obviously that's what I gravitate towards when I read. And then those contemporary fiction tropes, celebrity, fake romance, even better if you combine the two. Thank you, Rachel Spangler. So I think Lee Winter did the same thing, combining the two. There's a couple of them out there. Uh, but right now, like TV shows, as far as I don't watch a lot of TV, but we make time for a few shows. So we watch The Flash with the kids.
yep.
Um, we watch Batman with the oldest boy, and the plot's terrible. I'm just watching it for Ruby Rose's face at this point. So, um, and then Carrie and I watch Supergirl. And then
Right.
when we get a chance, even though we have like a zillion back episodes because we just can't keep up, Legends of Tomorrow because it's ridiculous.
Yes, love it. Batshit crazy show, but I absolutely
Completely
love it.
irreverent and ridiculous, and it's awesome. And we're way behind on that because it's just busy.
Hmm.
Um, Other than that, every so often we would catch an episode of Black Mirror. Um, we're still in the first or second season. On my own, when I have like time to kill, like 8-10 minutes, I
Hmm.
discovered this channel on YouTube called Dust. And if you like sci-fi, you will hate me for telling you about this channel because I mean, you can have stuff that's anywhere from 6 minutes long to an hour long, and they're all different kinds of sci-fi and themes and ideas, and they're just like little short movies.
Hmm.
It's amazing. Yeah,
Huh.
Dust,
I'll have to check.
Dust.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out.
So if you're a huge sci-fi fan, I recommend just checking it out on YouTube. And it's free. Like it's amazing. You can watch it on your phone. You can watch it anywhere. Um, so the next book, I think we're on that part, right?
Yeah.
The next book I have coming out is my nod to Isaac Asimov,
Mm.
because I grew up reading a lot of stuff that was probably too old for me to read at the time. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I'm reading Isaac Asimov. I'm reading Piers Anthony, Piers Anthony is pretty decent. Um, I'm reading Robert Heinlein. Those definitely get a little racier. One of my all-time favorite sci-fi novels was Friday.
Hmm.
I haven't read it in years, but that is like the penultimate of kick-ass um, female lead. So, sorry, my stuff is not. I got 2 new covers today,
Mm.
and I'm so excited because it is the next book that's coming out, um, as well as the one after that. So I have 2 more books that are coming out this year. Oh, that just went away. I have 2 more books that are coming out this year. The next one is called Remember Me Synthetica. And do you want the blurb to that?
Sure.
I'm just trying to bring up these images because I think I can actually share them. Um, right? I
I have
think
no idea. I'm just
our
here to
moderator disappeared.
listen. Yeah, don't. I am not the technical person to ask.
So Remember Me Synthetica is the next book that comes out. And that one centers around this. She is a roboticist, and in my world, because it's my world and I can do what I want,
Yes.
uh, in my world, she is the great niece of the very famous Alan Turing,
Mm.
um, who some of you may know, some of you may not know. But Alan Turing was a British, like a roboticist. He actually had 7 degrees. He was also extremely maligned by the British government because he was gay. He was, I believe, chemically castrated.
Yes.
Um, and
Or
really a
something like that.
terrible,
Yeah.
yeah, it was a really terrible, like, I ended up for him. And I think he was later like pardoned and given like a medal or something for the work he did during the war. The blurb for Remember Me Synthetica, which right now is tentatively July 1st. What happens when a woman loses her memory but gains a conscience? Dr. Alexandra Turing is a roboticist whose intellect is unrivaled in the field of artificial intelligence. While science has always come easy, Alexandra struggles to understand emotional cues and responses. Driven by the legacy of her late great uncle, she dedicates her life to the Synthetica project at her father's company, Organic Advancement Solutions. Her life is rebooted when she wakes from a coma 6 months after being struck by a car. Traumatic brain injury altered Alex's senses, her memory, and her personality. Despite the changes, she feels reborn as she navigates her way back into her old life. Part of her new journey includes dating the alluring doctor of veterinary medicine, Emily St. John. Emily is enamored with the hyper-intelligent scientist, but there are things about Alex and OAS that don't add up. With Emily's prompting, Alex undergoes testing that leaves her with more questions than answers. What she discovers changed more than her life. It will change the world around her.
Nice. Look
So
forward to
that
that one. Yeah.
that one is very, like I said, it's just my nod. It's got some like suspense to it. It's got humor. It's pretty. My editor says it's a good balance. I think it's more science heavy. Um, she said it's a good balance. So for me, science heavy might not be science heavy to like science fiction people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's definitely not light sci-fi like I mentioned before. Some people have kind of a sci-fi light. This is just sci-fi, but it's also romance. So,
What's the breakdown for this one? The percentages.
mm, you know, the romance is interwoven like throughout the entire thing. This isn't like uh, when I wrote the book Burn It Down about the Detroit firefighter. That one to me was primarily about, oh, look, somebody was going to show my screen. That one to me was primarily about um,
Ah.
Can you see it?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Um, so that book was primarily about her journey dealing with guilt and heartbreak and her past and all of that stuff. But there was also romance in it. So this book is definitely way more romance. I would say it's more romance than Children of the Stars, but it's also science heavy
Right.
just because of the nature of her job. I mean, she's a roboticist.
Mm-hmm.
She's, I had to do a lot of science research for that just to write about the company itself. Like I had to read all about nanotechnology. It's really fascinating, by the way.
Yeah, that's I'll always prefer fantasy just because I can, like you said, it'd be like my book, my rules, my
Magic.
world.
Yeah, magic.
I
Poof.
do what I
Bippity
want.
boppity boom.
That's right. Boom.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
All right. Um, and then just to show you my other novel, my other cover, the sequel to The Sovereign of Sayer, The Lost Temple of Sayer. This is the cover for that. So thank you, Anne McMahon, who is a wonderful cover artist.
Mm-hmm.
She is just churning out the hits. Um, okay, how do I stop sharing that?
Maria will have to do magic in order to make you stop sharing. Thanks.
So, but yeah, I was so geeked for the Synthetica cover. I just got it today, so
Mm.
I was super excited.
Does anybody else have any sci-fi shows or anything that they love? I love all of those shows on the CW. Uh, oh, okay, there she is, but she's not up yet. I watch every single one of them.
There we go. All right.
Hey, there you
By the
are.
way, by the way, I had a little pop-up that said the organizer dismissed you from the training, so
That was that was my fault. I am
that
such
should be.
I'm very bad at this job.
All
Mhm.
right, that's
Like the
okay.
Gong Show. You talk too much now. She's the guest.
You're doing better than I would. So I gotta now I have to set it up again. Jeez, I have to
Yes.
pop out my little chat box so that I can see what people are saying.
Oh,
Um,
Rebecca was asking me what shows I'm watching. I watch, like I told her, everything on the CW. All of the superhero shows on the CW. I don't watch like the regular romances, but
right.
anything in a cape, I'm pretty much there.
Anything in a cape. It's all
Anything
good.
in a cape, love it. Love. My favorite is the what's her name from Legends of Tomorrow, the White Canary, the
Oh
bisexual
yeah,
character.
yeah. Oh
Love
yeah.
her. She was a guest at something I was at a few years ago, some con, and I wanted to go get her autograph, but I was really afraid that I
Katie
would,
Lots.
yes, that I would want to say, I love your work. I think you're very talented. And I would end up saying, please marry my
No,
face or
yeah.
something. So I was like, just don't get in line. Just don't
Something.
go.
Yeah.
Yes,
Just stay back for everybody's sake.
that's right.
Um, yeah. I don't. I met Xena. They
Like
can't. It was funny
Lucy
because yeah.
Lawson.
One of my friends is a huge Xena fan, and Xena actually came to a Comic Con here in Detroit, Michigan. And so we saw her, and then it was like, was it the same year? So there's a Comic Con like the Motor City Comic Con, and then there's like Detroit Comic Con. So the Motor City Comic Con, Lucy Lawless was there, and then like a few months later, Renee O'Connor was at the other one. So we had to do both, um, my friend and I. So,
Yeah.
and the significance to me was that's actually reading Xena fan fiction was how I realized that I was not as straight as I thought I was.
So many stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I didn't even watch the show. I was just reading the fan fiction. So, and then that actually was my nod to that world, the ancient Greece. I wrote
Mm.
a fan fiction set in ancient Greece based on those characters. And because I did so much research about ancient Greece, the world wouldn't leave my head. And that's how my Arrow of Artemis series was born. It was definitely a nod to fan fiction. And most people would get that. Just like reading Radcliffe books, you'd like,
Okay.
it's a nod to fan fiction.
Yeah,
So
it's exactly the almost exactly the same story of how I wrote Coils is, yeah, Xena is your gateway drug into old Greek shit.
yes, she
Oh, and
totally is.
Cheryl even says GCLS originated from a group of writers of Xena fan fiction,
I,
so
I
the
actually know
legacy
that.
continues.
because I think my publisher was in the beginning days, and that was when they were, what was their original name of my publisher? But it was a group of authors that used to write fanfic, got together and they started publishing. Like I knew this long before I even found, like, decided to go with this publisher, um, mostly because I recognized all these authors as, like, I'm like, oh, I read all these stories when they're fanfic and I love them, you know? So like,
Yes.
I like the stable of authors. I'm
Yes.
so, it makes me so happy to see all of these fanfic authors that I love for, years publishing their works. And that's a whole nother story about how fan fiction really is the gateway to lesbian fiction and getting more younger authors and writers and readers in. But whatever, that's a whole panel right there. So
It is definitely, you should propose that one. Okay, well, we are just out of time, so I want to mention, please come back in April for the April Book Club on April 8th, where Tammy Bird will be here talking about her book, Sandman. I don't know who's moderating that one, but I'm sure it will be just odals of fun. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, Anne wants to know, will Kelly and Barbara Ann be at GCLS? I know I will. I think you will too, right, Kelly? Yes, we will both be
thumbs up.
there with bells on, doing panels and cracking jokes.
I'm not wearing bells.
I
You cannot sneak
am,
up.
but I'm not telling you where.
And
Okay.
on that note,
And Cheryl wants to know if we're going to Klexicon, and I am also going to Klexicon.
I am not going to Klexicon, unfortunately. That's on my bucket list someday.
Everybody should go. It's fantastic.
Yeah,
Yes.
someday. I would probably be overwhelmed. Superhero karaoke. I did read that for GCLS this year. We'll see. I'll
Yes.
just sing the same song that I always sing and try not to mess it up. So,
Yeah. Well, that'll be awesome. Thank you very much, Kelly, for coming to talk about your book. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And we will see you next time in April Book Club.
all right. And thank you, everyone, for having me. If you read my book, awesome. And Barbara Wright for grilling me thoroughly. So it's fun. I like that, the moderator was somebody that understands the spec fic struggle. So,
It's real.
all right. And I expect to see your bells at GCLS as long as they're in a safe for work place.
Oh, I'll never tell.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.